There's a strange pattern that psychologists keep noticing in human relationships. The louder one person becomes, the calmer the other eventually gets. And when that calm finally arrives, the relationship changes forever. Not because of shouting, not because of revenge, but because one person quietly reaches emotional exhaustion. Years ago, actor Will Smith spoke about something that deeply shocked people after his marriage struggles became public. He admitted that for years he kept trying to fix emotional tension by overgiving, over-explaining, overcompensating, trying harder every time distance appeared. And psychologists call this emotional overfunctioning. One person becomes responsible for carrying the emotional weight of the entire relationship. At first, it looks like love. But over time, something dangerous happens. The person who sacrifices too much slowly loses emotional gravity, and the other person unconsciously begins taking that effort for granted. That's where today's subject begins, not with anger, but with the moment a man emotionally detaches from chaos and discovers peace. Because the most painful thing for many people is not rejection. It's realizing the person they thought would always stay finally stopped chasing. And the terrifying part? It usually happens silently. No dramatic speech, no emotional explosion, just a quiet psychological shift. And history is full of moments like this. Years before becoming one of the most respected athletes on earth, Kobe Bryant was known for something unusual inside the NBA. Teammates described him as emotionally intense when he was younger, competitive, reactive, obsessed with proving himself. But after years of pressure, betrayal, criticism, and public humiliation, something changed in him psychologically. Phil Jackson once described Kobe's transformation as a movement toward emotional control and internal discipline. Less reacting, less emotional noise, more silence, more focus. And what made people respect him wasn't aggression, it was restraint. This is deeply connected to a psychological concept called emotional self-regulation, the ability to control impulses instead of being controlled by them. Most people think power is loud. But in behavioral psychology, true emotional power is usually quiet. The person who no longer needs to win every argument controls themselves instead of controlling others, and walks away from emotional manipulation without rage. Becomes psychologically difficult to disturb. That energy changes relationships, because many unhealthy dynamics survive on reaction. One person creates emotional turbulence. The other reacts emotionally, and the cycle continues. But when one side suddenly becomes calm, the entire structure collapses. And there's another story that reveals this in a brutal way. In the final years of his life, Muhammad Ali was asked about strength. People expected him to talk about fighting. Instead, he said something much deeper. He explained that real strength wasn't throwing punches. It was controlling yourself when emotions wanted to control you. That statement reflects one of the oldest psychological truths in human behavior. Uncontrolled emotion creates temporary relief, but disciplined emotion creates permanent respect. And this is where many men fail emotionally in relationships. They think love means constant access, constant texting, constant reassurance, constant emotional availability. But sociology teaches something uncomfortable. People often value what feels emotionally grounded, not emotionally desperate. That doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming centered. There's a massive psychological difference between love and emotional dependency. Love says, I care about you. Dependency says, my peace depends on you. And once someone realizes your emotional state depends entirely on their behavior, the balance of the relationship changes. That's why emotional withdrawal feels so shocking when it finally happens. Not because the person became cruel, but because they stopped abandoning themselves. This is why some breakups confuse people. A woman says, he suddenly changed. But psychologically, he didn't suddenly change. He slowly became exhausted. Weeks of overthinking, months of emotional inconsistency, years of trying to hold together something unstable, until one day, his nervous system simply stops participating. And here's what makes this psychologically fascinating. When a person truly detaches emotionally, they usually stop trying to be understood. That's the stage psychologists sometimes connect to emotional acceptance. No more endless explaining. No more defending every intention. No more trying to force emotional clarity from someone committed to misunderstanding you. And ironically, that silence often becomes louder than any argument. Because people are used to reactions. They expect anger, begging, long emotional paragraphs, dramatic closure. But calm detachment creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is psychologically powerful, especially when the person who once chased validation suddenly no longer needs it. This is why emotional maturity changes attraction. A grounded man behaves differently. He doesn't collapse every time tension appears. He doesn't chase temporary reassurance. He doesn't make emotional decisions out of panic. He protects his peace. And neuroscience explains why this matters. When someone constantly lives in emotional chaos, the brain adapts to instability. Stress hormones rise, overthinking increases, emotional impulsivity grows stronger. But when a person finally creates emotional distance from chaos, their nervous system begins stabilizing. They think clearer, sleep better, react less emotionally, feel internally safer. And people around them notice the difference immediately. There's another famous example of this transformation. After years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela emerged without the bitterness many expected. That shocked the world. Because psychologically, people assumed suffering would make him hateful. Instead, discipline made him composed. And composure is deeply misunderstood. Composure is not weakness. It's controlled strength. Anyone can explode emotionally. Very few people can remain centered while disappointed, hurt, ignored, or misunderstood. That level of self-control changes how people experience your presence. Because calmness creates psychological weight. And eventually, the people who once ignored your value begin noticing your absence. Not because you manipulated them, but because your energy changed. You stopped chasing, stopped proving, stopped forcing, stopped carrying the emotional burden alone, and suddenly, they're face to face with consequences instead of your endless patience. That realization hurts people deeply, because humans often notice emotional safety only after losing access to it. And this is important. Choosing peace does not mean becoming emotionless. It means refusing to destroy yourself trying to earn basic respect. That's not ego. That's psychological self-respect. The healthiest relationships are not built on emotional control. They're built on mutual emotional responsibility. Two emotionally stable people. Two people capable of accountability. Two people capable of calm communication without manipulation, silent punishment, or emotional games. But when only one person carries the emotional maturity, eventually exhaustion arrives. And sometimes the strongest sentence a person ever says is nothing at all. Just distance, silence, peace, growth. And that silence changes everything. Because in modern relationships, silence is often misunderstood. Not every silence is punishment. Sometimes silence is healing. Sometimes silence is a nervous system recovering from emotional exhaustion. Sometimes silence is a man finally rebuilding himself after years of abandoning his own dignity, trying to keep someone else comfortable. And once a person experiences that internal peace, they rarely want chaos again. That's why emotionally grounded people become so difficult to manipulate. Their happiness is no longer controlled externally. And this creates one final psychological shift. The people who once underestimated them begin replaying memories in their mind, the loyalty, the patience, the effort, the emotional safety they once had access to. But by then, the emotionally exhausted version of that man no longer exists. Now, there's only someone calmer, stronger, more disciplined, more self-respecting, not driven by ego, driven by clarity. And clarity changes everything, because the strongest people are not the loudest ones. They're the people who can feel deep emotion without allowing emotion to destroy their judgment. That is emotional intelligence. That is discipline. That is psychological strength. And most people don't recognize its value until it quietly disappears from their life. So here's the question. What do you think hurts more in relationships? Angry words, or peaceful distance from someone who finally stopped chasing? Write your answer in the comments. Some childhood wounds never heal. They simply hide inside adult behavior. The next video appearing on your screen, 11 childhood trauma signs, the hidden damage adults ignore. Watch carefully. You may recognize yourself in ways you never expected. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.